500 years. That's how long the most elusive mathematical equation in history has remained unsolved. Sir Isaac Newton dedicated half his life to it, only to walk away defeated. Leonhard Euler went as far as to call it a curse. Yet this morning, Professor Gerald chalked that very number, 500, onto the blackboard with absolute arrogance, turning to face the cameras and an audience of 14 million people watching live. He boasted, "The Aldric Equation has no solution, and tonight I am here to prove it never will." The auditorium erupted into thunderous applause, but in the 9th row, a black woman quietly raised her hand. The professor's smile vanished, replaced by a gaze as cold and sharp as a letter opener. Speaking over the microphone, his voice dripped with condescension. "Yes?" The young lady in the 9th row. "If you're here to clean the hall, janitorial services 2 floors down. Don't ruin the shot for national television." 60% of the room burst into mocking laughter. The other 40% fell into a suffocating silence. They realized they were witnessing a brutal public humiliation on live TV. Yet, she kept her hand raised, her gaze unwavering, looking right through him. The arrogant professor had no idea that behind his back, the entire panel of judges was turning pale, cold sweat dripping down their faces. They had just caught a glimpse of the folder on her desk. The woman he had just dismissed as a janitor was the only person on Earth holding the proof that Newton was wrong. The equation did have a solution, and she was there to rewrite history. "I'm not from facilities, Professor Whitmore. I'm on page 4 of the program. Invited scholar." Whitmore walked down from the stage. Slowly, the kind of slow that is designed to be watched. He stopped in the aisle beside the 9th row and looked down at her badge. He read it. His eyebrows moved. He laughed once, a short, dry sound through his nose. Caldwell Institute. He said it the way someone says the name of a restaurant they would never eat at. "They're giving out Annals invitations to Caldwell Institute now. What's next?" "Online certificates." He leaned one hand on the seat back in front of her. "Sit down, sweetheart. This is not the room for whoever told you that you were ready for this." The woman did not sit down. She did not raise her voice. She did not move at all, except to lower her hand slowly, deliberately, until it rested flat on the green cover of the notebook in her lap. Behind Whitmore, on the panel table at the front of the room, something was happening to the faces of the other 5 mathematicians sitting there. Had one of them, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a posture like a cathedral wall, had gone very still. She was watching. And she was not watching Whitmore. She was watching the notebook. Pay attention to that notebook. It matters more than anything else in this room. This was supposed to be the greatest night of Gerald Whitmore's professional life. He had planned it for 11 years. The Aldric Equation. Written in 1538 by a German mathematician named Heinrich von Aldrich, a monk. 6 lines of notation scratched in the margins of a theological manuscript, found 2 centuries later in a monastery in Bavaria. 6 lines that had survived Luther and Newton and Euler and Ramanujan and Gödel. 6 lines that had defeated every serious attempt at solution for nearly 5 centuries, so thoroughly that the mathematics community had developed a quiet consensus. The equation was likely ill-formed, a historical curiosity, beautiful and meaningless. Whitmore's position was different. His position, which he had published in 3 separate papers and a 487-page book currently sitting in a warehouse in New Jersey awaiting its national release, was that the equation was not ill-formed. It was not meaningless. It was provably, demonstrably, permanently unsolvable, and he was the man who would prove that. 42,000 copies pre-printed. A documentary deal with a streaming platform. A keynote at the National Mathematics Symposium in Chicago, broadcast live tonight by 3 networks, streaming to an estimated 14 million viewers worldwide. Had. Backstage, 30 minutes before the lecture, his editor Marcus had straightened Whitmore's tie with the efficient hands of a man who had made a great deal of money off other people's confidence. "You ready?" "I've been ready for 11 years, Marcus." The pre-orders bumped again this morning, 62,000 now. Whitmore had looked at himself in the mirror and seen a man standing at the edge of the textbooks. "Put my name in the index under solved. That's all I want." The auditorium was full, 740 people. The American Mathematical Society. Department chairs from 43 universities, a former Fields medalist, 2 Nobel-adjacent figures, science correspondents from 3 major newspapers and 5 digital outlets, C-SPAN running a second camera, and in the invited scholars section, rows 8 through 11, 12 young mathematicians selected by the editorial board of the Annals of Pure Mathematics, 1 from each of 12 institutions. One of the 12 was from Caldwell Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. Her name was Naomi Brade. She was 23 years old. She was the only black woman in the invited scholars section. She was one of 4 black faces in the entire room of 740 people. And she had counted them when she walked in, not because she wanted to, but because she always did. She had almost not come. The invitation had arrived by email 6 weeks ago, signed by the editorial board. She had read it 3 times before she believed it. Then she had called her mother in Baltimore. "Mama, they invited me to Chicago." A silence. "Baby." "For what?" "The Aldric Symposium." "At the National Mathematics Center." Another silence, longer. Then her mother had said, very quietly, "That's your daddy's room." Naomi had not answered that. She had only pressed her thumb against the edge of the envelope. The invitation had arrived in and held on. The seat beside her in the 9th row had been occupied when she sat down. The man who had been sitting there looked at her name badge, looked at her face, looked back at his program, and moved 3 rows forward. He didn't speak. He just left, and the empty seat stayed empty for the entire first part of the lecture, which told its own story to anyone willing to read it. During the pre-lecture reception, a man in a catering uniform walked up to her with a tray of sparkling water and said, "You want to grab the other end of this?" She was wearing the gold-lettered badge that read Invite Scholar. She pointed to it wordlessly. The man squinted, turned pink, and walked away. Behind her, close enough that she could hear every word, 2 department chairs were talking about the Invited Scholars Program. Caldwell Institute. Is that even R1 accredited? Barely. It's one of those places, you know. Equity focus institutions. Annals is trying to diversify their optics. The kid from Stanford should have had that seat. Brilliant student. Rigorous. But no, we need to check boxes now. It's a disservice to everyone. Naomi opened her notebook. Green cover, scuffed at the corners, the spine retaped twice. She ran her thumb down the edge of the pages, an old habit, the way her father used to rap his knuckles twice on the doorframe of his study before he sat down to work. Her father, Harrison Brade. Born in Charlotte, North Carolina, 1961. Self-taught mathematician, no formal degree, published 1 paper in a small journal in 1998. 42 pages. The subject, a structural anomaly in the Aldric equation. Specifically, his argument that the equation, as it appeared in every modern textbook, was a transcription error. That Heinrich von Aldrich had used a differential symbol that a Dutch copyist in 1712 had misread as an integral, and that every subsequent version of the equation had inherited the mistake. He had sent the paper to 7 journals, 6 form rejections. The 7th, Annals of Pure Mathematics, sent a peer review response. This response said his approach was mathematically naive and his source analysis historically unsubstantiated. Harrison Brade drove a bus for the Charlotte area transit system for 22 years. He kept the rejection letter in a shoebox under his bed. When Naomi was 9, he showed it to her and said, Someone decided this was wrong without reading it. Don't you let anyone do that to your work. He died of a heart attack when she was 15. She found the paper in the shoebox 3 months later. She read it. Then she read it again. Then she sat down and started the notebook. The notebook she was holding right now, in the 9th row of the National Mathematics Symposium, had 219 pages of work in it. On page 1, in her 15-year-old handwriting, September 14, 2016, for Daddy. On page 211, circled in red ink 3 times, the solution. She did not know yet that Gerald Whitmore was the anonymous peer reviewer who had rejected her father's paper in 1998. She was about to find out, along with everyone else. The lights dimmed. Whitmore walked to the stage with the particular stride of a man who has rehearsed his entrance. He picked up the chalk and wrote the Aldric Equation on the board. 6 lines, slowly. Performing each symbol, he stepped back. He smiled. There it is. The most beautiful impossibility in human history. He let the room look at it. The question I am here to answer tonight is not, can it be solved? The answer to that is no. The question I am here to answer is, why not? And why that answer should finally close the door. He turned to the room, swept his eyes across 740 faces. His expression was already moving toward the first line of his proof. That's when Naomi raised her hand. He didn't see it immediately. When he did, the lecture changed. The way he walked down the aisle toward her was not curiosity. It was management. It was the particular movement of a man who has decided to handle a situation before it becomes one. Then came the badge reading. Then the Caldwell comment. Then, sit down, sweetheart, the woman in the silver-streaked hair at the panel table, Dr. Patricia Ossie, chair of the mathematics department at the University of Chicago, Fields Medal 2000. Put down her pen. Quietly. 3 rows behind Naomi, a graduate student named David Cho had been live tweeting the event for a mathematics forum with 14,000 subscribers. His hands slowed. He read what he had just witnessed. He looked at his phone. He looked at Naomi. He did not post. He held his phone in his lap and watched. Naomi said, "Professor Whitmore, I think there's an error in line 3. The room did not gasp. The room inhaled. Whitmore's smile returned, wider than before, the kind of wide that has nothing to do with pleasure. An error. He straightened. He clasped his hands behind his back. In my equation. In the transcription used by the equation, yes. The integral sign in line 3. The original 1538 manuscript at the Bavarian State Library uses a differential, not an integral. The substitution changes the entire structure of the problem. The smile did not move. Young lady. He said it with the patience of someone explaining traffic signs to a child. I have spent 11 years on this equation. I have examined every primary source. I have corresponded with the Bavarian State Library. I have had 3 separate paleographers review the manuscript images. He paused. He let the room absorb the list. I think I would know if there was an error. The manuscript images, yes, Naomi said. But in 2019, the library completed a multispectral imaging project on the theological collection. The original folio is now available in full resolution. The differential is visible under the right wavelength. The 1712 Dutch copy, the one that all subsequent printed versions trace back to, the copyist had cataracts in his right eye. His physician's record is in the Amsterdam Municipal Archive. The misread is documented. Silence. Not the polite silence between comments. Something heavier. The kind of silence that precedes the moment when everyone in a room realizes they are watching something they will show the rest of their lives. Whitmore did not blink. His jaw moved once. Then he said very quietly, with a smile still mathematically present on his face, I don't know where you're getting these claims, but I would strongly suggest that before you speak again in this room, you consider very carefully what it means to publicly challenge someone who has spent more years on this problem than you have been alive. He paused. Sit down, sir. Naomi's voice had not changed pitch a single degree. I'm not challenging you. I'm raising a transcription question. If the line 3 symbol is a differential, not an integral, the equation doesn't prove unsolvability. It opens into a system of 2 related equations, each solvable. I have a proof. I have been working on it for 8 years. Whitmore laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It bounced off the back wall. She has a proof. He gestured at the room. An invited scholar from Caldwell Institute has an 8-year proof of the Aldric Equation that somehow eluded every major mathematics institution in the world. He shook his head. I don't know who gave you this invitation, young woman, but they did you no favors. This kind of disruption doesn't build careers, it ends them. He pointed at her seat. I will not say it again. 3 things happened at once. Dr. Patricia Osei stood up from the panel table. She was not hurrying. People who move with that kind of authority don't hurry. David Cho in row 12 pressed post, and Naomi Brade opened her notebook to page 1. Dr. Osei, Whitmore said, turning. His voice had the edges of a man who felt control, leaving the room like heat. Gerald. Patricia Osei did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The microphone caught every syllable. Give the young woman the chalk. The room stopped breathing. Patricia, this is give her the chalk. Whitmore held it for 2 seconds that felt like 20. Then he set it on the edge of the tray. He did not hand it. He set it down and stepped back, and the distance between his hand and that chalk and Naomi Brade was the distance between what he believed the world was and what it was about to become. Naomi walked to the board. She erased line 3. She wrote it correctly. Then she kept writing. What happened over the next 71 minutes was not a lecture. It was not a performance. It was the opposite of performance. It was the private, made public 8 years of a green notebook played out in chalk on a board, while 740 people stopped checking their phones and started leaning forward. The C-SPAN producer, a 43-year-old veteran who had covered 4 presidential inaugurations, later said she had never once told her camera operator stay on her face with that particular urgency in her voice. Naomi didn't explain what she was doing as she did it, she just did it. The way her father used to work at the kitchen table, silently, with complete attention, one hand holding the page flat. At line 41, one of the other panelists made a sound, a small involuntary sound, and covered his mouth. Line 77, Dr. Osei walked to the board and stood 3 feet away, reading. Her expression did not change, but she clasped her hands behind her back, and anyone who knew her knew that meant she was reading something she needed both hands busy to resist touching. Whitmore sat in the front row. He had sat down somewhere around line 28, when it became clear that the structural argument Naomi was building was not naive, and was not unsubstantiated, and was not the work of someone who did not belong in the room. He sat with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the floor. The cameras held on him. The cameras did not move away from him. His editor Marcus, sitting beside him, was on his phone. His hands had been shaking since approximately line 55. He had already received 4 calls from the publishing house. He was not answering them. Naomi wrote the final 4 lines. She did not rush. She set the chalk down on the tray. She stepped back. She did not say anything. Dr. Osei walked to the board. She read from the top, every line. She took 9 minutes. No one in the auditorium moved for 9 minutes. When she reached the circled answer at the bottom, a clean, whole number, the kind of answer that has a sense of inevitability once you see it, the kind of answer that makes you feel that it was always there waiting, she turned to face the room. It holds. Her voice was steady. Every line is valid. The Aldric equation has been solved. The room did not erupt. It cracked, like ice. A slow fracture that spread from the back to the front as 740 people processed, simultaneously, what they had just witnessed. Someone in the third row stood up, then someone else, then 10 people, then 30. In the press row, every laptop was already open. Every reporter had already typed the same 2 words into the same empty subject line. Whitmore sat in the front row and did not stand. He did not stand because he could not. Not because of his body, but because something in the room had shifted in a way that made standing feel dishonest, and for once in his life Gerald Whitmore could not bring himself to perform. Then the other thing happened. Dr. Reginald Bishop, the oldest member of the panel, had been quiet for the entire 71 minutes. He was 71 years old, the founding editor of the Annals of Pure Mathematics, a man who had reviewed 10,000 papers in 4 decades, and who had a memory for institutional records that his graduate students called inhuman. He had pulled something up on his tablet during line 63. He had said nothing. He had read it 3 times. Now he stood. "Before we proceed," he said into his microphone, and the room fell silent with the speed of people who understand that something significant is still coming. "There is a matter of institutional record that this panel has an obligation to address." On behalf of Annals of Pure Mathematics, he turned the tablet around and set it on the display stand where it could be read by the room and by every camera. It was a peer review record, dated November 1998. Paper submitted, a transcription anomaly in the Aldric Equation, by Harrison Brade, Charlotte, North Carolina, independent researcher. Reviewer's assessment, naive. Source analysis historically unsubstantiated. Recommend rejection without revision. Not suitable for annals. Author lacks institutional credibility and the background necessary to advance claims of this nature. Reviewer signature, G. Whitmore, MIT Department of Mathematics. The room did not make a sound. David Cho in row 12 pressed post again. Gerald Whitmore, Dr. Bishop said, and the quiet way he said the name was worse than shouting, was the sole peer reviewer who evaluated Harrison Brade's 1998 paper. Harrison Brade is the father of Naomi Brade. The paper submitted in 1998 proposed the same structural anomaly, the transcription error in line 3, that his daughter has just used to solve this equation tonight. He paused. Gerald rejected the work that contained the answer to the question he has spent 11 years claiming was unanswerable. He rejected it 27 years ago and built his entire career on that door, staying closed. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Gerald Whitmore stood up. That review was based on the information available at the time. His voice was tight and careful, the voice of a man still trying to manage a situation. Brade's paper had no institutional affiliation, no peer verification, no access to primary sources that, he cited the Bavarian State Library, Dr. Bishop said. He cited the Amsterdam Municipal Archive, page 31 of his paper. He had clearly read it. He had clearly read it long before tonight. The sources your colleague cited tonight are the same sources her father cited in 1998. You rejected them then. You had the answer. And you said no. I made a judgment call based on Gerald. Dr. Osi turned from the chalkboard. She had not moved from it until now. She walked to the panel table. She placed one hand flat on the surface. Stop talking. He stopped. The silence was suffocating. The kind of silence that presses on your chest. The joint authorship amendment, Dr. Osi said, without looking away from Whitmore. Under Section 4 of the Annals Publication Ethics Code, when a solution demonstrably extends from work that was previously suppressed in peer review, the institution has the authority to require retroactive co-attribution. She set a document on the table. Harrison Brade, Charlotte, North Carolina, 1998. Co-originator of the structural approach. On the record, tonight, permanently. Whitmore looked at the document. He looked at the cameras. He looked at the 740 people who were all very still and looking back at him. I want to speak to my legal. You can speak to anyone you like after. Dr. Bishop's voice was not raised. It had the quality of a man who has simply decided. Right? Now you're going to sign the amendment, Gerald, or we are going to adjourn this symposium and reconvene in the morning, with the full ethics board and every journalist in this room waiting outside. He slid the document forward. Your career is not over yet. It doesn't have to be. But it ends right here if you don't pick up that pen. Whitmore sat. He picked up the pen. His signature looked like something written during an earthquake. In the back row, 2 of Whitmore's doctoral students had gathered their bags. They had been gathering them since line 70 of the proof. They did not want to be in the room for the next hour. They had already, in quiet, separate moments, composed messages to different members of the mathematics faculty at different institutions. Marcus, the editor, was finally answering his phone. He had stepped into the aisle and was speaking in a voice that barely moved his lips. The call was from the CEO of the publishing house. The 62,000 pre-printed copies in the New Jersey warehouse were about to become the subject of a very expensive conversation. Dr. Osi walked to the 9th row. She bent down, lifted Naomi's green notebook from the seat where Naomi had left it, and carried it back to the front. She did not open it. She set it on the panel table and placed one hand on the cover. Gently, the way you place your hand on something you want to make sure is still there. "Miss Brade," she said, "would you join us?" Naomi walked to the panel table. She did it in 12 steps. 14 million people watched her walk. The cameras did not cut away once. Dr. Bishop opened the notebook, not to the middle, to page 1. He read what was written there in 15-year-old handwriting. He took his time with it. He held it for a moment before setting it back on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what you watched tonight was the public conclusion of 8 years of work. But the origin of that work is 27 years old, and it belongs to a man named Harrison Brade, who drove a bus in Charlotte, North Carolina, and who was told in 1998 that he didn't have the right credentials to be taken seriously. He paused. He was right. He had been right for 27 years, and the institution that rejected him owes him, and his daughter, a formal accounting." He looked at Naomi. "Is there anything you would like to say for the record?" Naomi looked at the notebook on the table. She was quiet for 3 seconds. "My father's name is Harrison Brade," she said. "He worked Fazen's problem at a kitchen table in Charlotte for 6 years. He didn't have a university. He didn't have a grant. He had a lamp and a notebook, and the 1998 edition of a math history textbook with the Aldric chapter flagged with a yellow sticky note." She stopped. "He submitted his paper one time. He got 1 rejection. He never submitted again." She looked up. "I'd like his name attached to this solution. Not mine. His first, mine second." Dr. Bishop wrote it down, on paper, by hand, the way things that matter get written. The months that followed moved the way aftershocks move. 3 weeks later, the American Mathematical Society released a formal statement acknowledging the peer review failure in the 1998 rejection of Harrison Brade's paper. "Cite insufficient basis for dismissal and evidences of bias in the reviewer assessment." It was the first such public accountability statement the organization had issued in its history. It would not be the last. Gerald Whitmore's book, The Unsolvable, was pulled from publication before its release date. The warehouse copies were rerouted for disposal. The streaming documentary deal was voided by mutual agreement, which is the polite term for what happens when one party realizes a documentary about a man being definitively wrong is not the documentary they signed up to produce. The publishing house filed a breach of contract claim. Whitmore's attorney filed a counter-response. By April, 3 former doctoral students had submitted formal complaints to the MIT Mathematics Department about the peer review practices in Whitmore's research group. An internal review was opened. His named chair was placed under administrative review pending the outcome. He did not lose everything at once. He lost things in increments, the way a man who has built his reputation on a single claim loses it when the claim collapses. Piece by piece, each piece going quietly, each one barely making a sound until the sound of all of them together becomes deafening. The thing that finally broke him was not the ethics board. It was a letter. It arrived 9 weeks after the symposium, forwarded through annals. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of a page from his own 1998 review notes, his personal handwritten draft before he typed the formal rejection. At the bottom of the draft, in his own handwriting from 1998, he had written, "Interesting structural argument. Transcription claim would need primary source verification. Potentially publishable if author had institutional support." He had known. He had known the argument was interesting, and he had rejected it anyway, not because it was wrong, but because the man who wrote it drove a bus in Charlotte and had no university letterhead. He requested a private meeting with Dr. Bishop. He came to it without his attorney, which surprised everyone. He sat across from Bishop for 40 minutes. What was said in that room was never publicly disclosed. When Whitmore left, his face had the quality of a man who has put something down that he carried for a very long time, and finding out it was lighter than he expected is not the relief he thought it would be. He requested, through annals, that a corrected attribution note be added to the 1998 archive record. Paper rejected in error. Reviewer acknowledges the validity of the core structural approach. Original claim of the transcription anomaly belongs to Harrison Brade. It was published in the Annals Corrections Index in the spring edition. Naomi was in her apartment in Baltimore when the edition went live. She was sitting at her desk, which was her father's desk, which she had driven up from Charlotte in a rented van 3 years ago, and which still had the yellow sticky note on the edge of the right-hand drawer, faded but readable. Harrison's handwriting. Check the 1538 folio. Something's wrong in line 3. She was offered a research fellowship at the University of Chicago. She accepted it. She asked if she could complete her remaining coursework at Caldwell Institute concurrently, and they said yes before she finished the sentence. She was also offered a book deal. She asked for one condition, that the title credit read Brade and Brade. Her editor said yes. She called her mother. The night the Annals correction went live, "Mama," her mother's voice came through the phone the way a sound comes through a wall when you've been listening for it for a long time. "Baby, you did it. Daddy did it first. I know. A breath. He always did." Naomi set the phone down on the desk. She picked up the green notebook and held it the way her father used to hold a paper when he was satisfied. Flat in both hands, not reading it, just holding it. Like it weighed exactly what it was worth. Outside, Baltimore was doing whatever Baltimore does at 9:30 on a Wednesday in late autumn. Cars. Rain starting. Someone's music from an upstairs window. She opened the notebook to page 1. September 14, 2016. For Daddy. She didn't close it right away. She sat with it open in the lamplight for a while. She thought about line 3 of the Aldric Equation, and the Dutch copyist with cataracts in his right eye, and all the things that had gone wrong in 1712 and 1998 and every year between them that had all somehow, against every reasonable probability, ended up leading here, to this desk, to this notebook, to a number, clean and whole, circled 3 times in red ink, that had been waiting 500 years for someone patient enough and stubborn enough and loved enough to find it. If this story reached you tonight, if you recognized someone in it, if you thought of a door that was closed on someone you know or on yourself, share it. Put their name in the comments. Because somewhere right now there is a person with a notebook and a lamp and the right answer, And the only thing standing between them and the world is someone deciding they don't have the right credentials to be heard. They do. Like this if you believe that. And tell me, have you ever been in that room, on either side of it? I read every single comment.